Okay, so announced on the schedule was that we would be talking about working with devas and masters. I think devas is enough for one lecture, so the masters will come as part of my lecture tomorrow. And this is all about cooperative work with the devas. So the first question is, what are devas? And we need to talk about the deva evolution. I've mentioned it before. Now we'll make a little more precise understanding of what that means. So here's a definition of a deva. The word is Sanskrit. It means shining one, and it refers to a god. An evolutionary hierarchy of non-physical, non-human beings that runs parallel to human development. From lowly elementals through nature spirits and fairies to ever higher angels and archangels. This is the deva evolution, as I define it. So devas are the thoughts of God manifesting as conscious beings. To embody and enforce the laws of the universe, not only physical and scientific laws such as gravity and thermodynamics, but also spiritual and moral laws such as the law of karma. Devas are the force of synthesis, which is a force that makes things whole. They create and maintain links between physical and non-physical reality, while uniting every conscious being and level of existence into ever larger wholes. So you can think about soil, bacteria, plants, and animals being united into an ecosystem, and there would be a landscape deva who was responsible for that system. They also can help to link individual humans into humanity as a whole, and we can learn from them how to best take care of our planet, how to be a planetary steward. So let's think about devas and the Theosophical Society. With respect to our approach to them, the first object would require that we have a belief in their existence, that we have respect for their presence, whether we're aware of it or not, and that we have gratitude in our hearts. That always opens the way for connection with devas. With the second object, comparative study, we do need to understand something about their types and functions. And with the third object, unknown laws and latent powers, we need to develop our perception and our ability to identify them. So cooperative work with the devas obviously embraces all three objects. So for that reason, I think that cooperative work with devas is a worthwhile thing for people in the Theosophical Society to pursue. So what does cooperative work with the devas mean? I'm heading this into the great unknown because we're dealing with what is essentially non-human, you could say alien species. And my theory is that when aliens show up in people's dreams and visions, they are interpreting deva consciousness in terms of science fiction. That isn't to say that the encounter is somehow false or wrong, only that people have translated it into a different system than the one that it was originally intended for, which is more like an angel. So once again, I'm going to go through a series of slides like I have in earlier presentations that talks about the stages of cooperative work, but focusing especially on the devas. Again, I'm hoping that you will develop from this the understanding that stages of cooperative work is kind of a template that you can apply to any area of your life that you're wanting to explore cooperative work in. So it starts with declaring your intention to be of service, in this case to the deva evolution, which, as I mentioned, includes nature spirits, devas or godlike beings, and angels. The most important thing to understand about working with devas is cooperation, not coercion. Because it used to always be that people who prided themselves on magic were trying to enslave devas in order to do their will. And the devas will sometimes agree to doing that, but they don't like it. any more than you can imagine a dolphin or a whale would like to be held captive in a zoo, something like that. However, we also have to be very conscious about how we work with the devas. There's a lot of New Age information about creating your reality through intention. Well, the actual beings that help you create your reality are the devas. And if you're constantly projecting your intention, it's like you're yelling at them. And so they get it. All you have to do is put it out there once, really. But if you're afraid somehow that it's not going to manifest itself, you might keep trying, pushing, and they don't like that. They withdraw from it. And also, because your intention is combined not only with what you want, but with your fear of not getting it, you'll probably end up getting it in a way that you don't want it, which is a typical experience that people have with wishes, intentions, and devas, and it's everywhere in fairy tales. So, for example, there's a famous supernatural story called The Monkey's Paw, about a monkey's paw that was somehow blessed or cursed, and that it would help you make a wish and make the wish come true. But it always made the wish come true in some really awful way. So this couple ends up with the monkey's paw, and they make a wish for some money to do something, and the money comes to them, but it comes to them as something like an insurance settlement for the death of their son on the other side of the world. So we have to be careful what we ask for with the devas. So instead of cooperation, I'm going to suggest that the word collaboration is best. What I mean by collaboration is equal contributions from both sides. When I mentioned this in a talk that I gave last week to mostly people from the Dutch section, they said that the word collaboration was a problem for them. It's a neutral word in English, but it's understood, at least here in the Netherlands, as collaboration like the Nazis and the Dutch who are Nazi sympathizers. So I just want to be very clear. Collaboration means that we have an intention and we have a desire to be of service. The devas also want to work with us. We find a way to work together as equal partners in creating something. For me, cooperation doesn't quite cover the ground, because you can cooperate by doing the commands of someone. You can also cooperate by having an equal amount of input from both sides. But I want to steer clear of the idea of cooperation as some kind of command or task that either we demand of the devas or that they demand of us. However, the only way you can get collaboration is having ease of communication from both sides. And that takes some development, which I'll talk about as the talk progresses. So let's again continue with stages of cooperative work. You have to prepare yourself. That can involve studying the field. In this case, mystics will probably study the powers and laws or the energy aspects of the Deva evolution. Empaths will probably be drawn to the beings and their needs. That's the consciousness aspect. Seers will be attracted to the ideas of the different bodies and levels and planes that are involved with Deva work, and that's information. Now you can see concretely and practically why I talked about the psychic types in my first lecture. The ideal is to combine energy, consciousness, and information, and then you have a complete experience of communication with the Devas. So I want to show some slides from Jeffrey Hodson's book, The Kingdom of the Gods. These are Devas that he was able to perceive clairvoyantly, and he communicated what he saw to an artist, and the artist created these paintings that were then printed in the book. So I've selected 3 of them, and each one of them emphasizes an aspect of what it means to contact a Deva, to help you understand the difference between mystics, empaths, and seers. So clearly, on the mystic path, if you're perceiving energy, what you'll see is a lot of movement of energy and practically no being. There is this sort of central area here that looks like it could be a being, but not really any features. What this slide shows is the temple of Borobudur, which is in Java. And you can see at the bottom one of the domes of this Buddhist temple. And then this is the deva that radiates from that. So compare that to this image of the World Mother, who is considered to be another angel or deva form. This is how an empath with consciousness would see a deva, as a loving, compassionate being, looking somewhat human. And then here is how someone on the seer side of things would see a deva, in terms of all kinds of information conveyed energetically and imagistically. Devi is the female version of Deva, and Kundalini, as you all know, is the spiritual power that helps to evolve humanity. This is a Kundalini Deva of the earth, as opposed to an individual human being. And you can see here, there we go. You can see here that there are chakras lined up in the Kundalini Devi. So we didn't see chakras in the other two. That's the kind of feature that would fascinate a seer. So that's really the best I can do to indicate, somewhat what it's like for the different types to experience something like a deva. This is another of Jeffrey Hodson's illustrations. It's of a fire deva, or a sylph. Now, I know sylphs and fire devas aren't the same, but you'll understand why I'm saying this is a sylph in a moment. One of my friends was taking a run by a river that goes through Boston, and this is what she saw in the sky.
Oh, wow.
She just happened to have her camera with her, so she was able to take a picture. So what this slide teaches is that devas try to find ways to show themselves on the physical plane, and they do that by adopting a body. And the body is made up of some natural substance. Here the body is made of clouds and sunlight and ice crystals. So they can do it also with wind. So then you have a whirlwind, that can be the body of a deva, or a dust storm that's going in circles, the same thing. When I'm walking in Boston in the fall, there will be these little swirls of leaves sometimes. And that's a nature spirit of the air spirit variety. And it has the intelligence level of a dog. And so if you can imagine dogs chasing their tails, it's kind of like that. And I always say hello whenever I see one of those. And one of them actually followed me as I walked down a street. It just was moving beside me because it was interested, I guess. Another time, a deva was trying to get my attention with a plastic bag. There was a strong wind, and the wind filled up the plastic bag like a balloon and then just went everywhere. It was just dancing in the air. And I stopped and watched it do that, and then eventually the deva got tired of it and the bag fell to the ground and off it went. But I must have watched it for 5 or 6 minutes, and it was trying to show itself to me, and its body was a plastic bag. So they can be very creative about these things. Okay, continuing with stages of cooperative work. In terms of preparing yourself, as always, we need to strive for unity consciousness. But we need to add into it a practice of non-harming. The devas come when they know that we have no intention to impose our will on them or command them in any way, coerce them in any way. So as we are practicing non-harming in our communication with other people, we can actually be preparing to communicate with devas along the same lines. And of course, everybody improves when we practice non-harming. Non-harming is the literal translation of the Sanskrit word ahimsa, which is something that many people who study yoga are very familiar with. So we also need to maintain an attitude of intention and invitation rather than ambition and coercion. As I mentioned, the devas will show up for people who are trying to control them with magic, but the devas only pretend to be controlled. At some point when they get tired of it, they do the same thing to the magician that they did to the plastic bag I was talking about. They deflate it and it falls. And so you have all of these stories and fairy tales, myths, legends, movies about people building their power and being supported by the gods, and then all of a sudden the gods pull the rug out from under them and they have a fall. We also need to overcome the fear of the alien quality of Deva consciousness. They have a group mind, they experience a kind of timeless joy. We have an individual mind, and in most of our cases it's not very strong in terms of its identity. And so it can feel overwhelming to be in touch with a group mind. And there's also some challenge that we human beings have around the experience of joy. We strive for happiness and we get it sometimes, but if joy shows up, we run away, or we don't let it last very long. So we have to learn to overcome these inhibitions in order to work with devas. One example that I talk about in my book Otherwhere is many, many years ago when I first started learning how to communicate with devas, I was dreaming of what I thought were dolphins and whales. They were actually devas that were showing themselves to me in that form because I could relate to them. And the size of the being was a determination of how high it was in the developmental hierarchy. So a dolphin-sized deva was about the same as a human level consciousness, but a whale-sized deva was something more than that. So one time in the middle of the night, I found myself suddenly experiencing this love that was so intense. I'd never experienced anything like it with any human being. It was really mind-blowing, but I also felt like I was drowning in it, and I felt like I had to swim up to get, above it so that I could somehow not be completely torn apart by it. And when I did get up to that level where I was free of drowning in it, here were two devas that looked like dolphins talking to each other. And that's how much love there was in their talking. It was more than the experience as human beings. So it takes some getting used to. We have to also become accustomed to this unfamiliar word, overlighting. Some of you probably know the word overshadowing. That's the more common expression. It's a word that's used for any kind of spiritual influence. We have such a strong sense of personal autonomy that we don't like that experience, so it seems like a shadow that's hanging over our head. But the spiritualists had the idea that if a higher being is coming and bringing you joy and support and help, it should be called overlighting instead of overshadowing, because they're helping you with an experience of becoming more enlightened. I should mention something about this previous thing. So overlighting can happen in several ways. This happens in our interactions with humans too. If our energy fields make contact and brush against each other, we can get a lot of information from that if we're clairvoyantly or psychically attuned. But you can go a level deeper, and the information the energy fields can overlap, and then there's a much deeper sharing, or they can completely merge, and then there's a total sharing. So I have some experiences of that total merging with someone, and it's like everything they know becomes something that you know, everything you know becomes something that they know, and the memories are almost indistinguishable from each other. It's a very interesting experience. We have to practice for this, because at some point we do merge all into a group consciousness where each of us maintains our individuality, but we also are all supporting and in a sense combined with everyone else. Certainly our experiences of unity consciousness during this week are a kind of practice for that. So the way that we prevent ourselves from being overwhelmed is we learn how to live from our core self. The Sanskrit word dharma means truth, but it can also mean path, it can also mean life purpose. If we think of our dharma as being service, that's one way that we can develop a stronger inner core. Whatever our life purpose might be, when we're practicing it, we experience joy. We're close to the devas, they want to help us, and we're strong enough to interact with them and not feel like they are in some way oppressing us with their timeless joy. I know that's a strange way to put it, but it's a very real experience to be overwhelmed by that. So in 2019, I did a 3-part program here called Sacred Spaces. And the lectures are all on YouTube. No one seems to know about them, so I've created a slide for your PDF so that you can look them up if you like. The first one was called Receiving and Preserving Sacred Spaces. The second one was Devas, Angels, and the Co-Creation of Sacred Space. And the third part was a practice called the Angels of the Four Corners, where we invoked angels into the four corners of this space. Power here, beauty here, love there, and truth there. So in the PDF, I will include instructions on how you can do this Angels of the Four Corners practice. You can do it for an altar, you can do it for a meditation room, you can do it for a whole dwelling space, you can do it for an office, maybe not something that you share with someone else, but if you have a private office, you can do it there and turn any of these places into sacred spaces. It would take me too long to explain how to do that, so you'll have the instructions in the PDF, but then you'll also have my explanation of it in person from the third of the Sacred Spaces videos. So again, continuing with the idea of stages of cooperative work, we begin climbing the ladder of oneness. So we'll start with, this is going to go very quick. You'll have to probably do some personal study on your own to completely follow all of this. But there's something called elemental essence. When the universe is creating itself, the elemental essence comes first. It drops down plane by plane. It reaches a point of equilibrium, the most material plane, which is our physical plane. Then it starts to take the form of minerals. And then it begins to evolve back up towards the source, and at that point it goes through the sequence that we're familiar with, minerals, plants, animals, humans, and so on. But somewhere in between the place where it's not completely material yet and when it starts on the upward path, we start to experience it as body elementals. So according to Leadbeater, each of us has not just a physical body, but a physical elemental that's responsible for the care of that body. That physical elemental and our body is linked to our consciousness, our soul, at the beginning of our life. The same thing with an emotional body or astral body, also a mental body, also a soul or causal body. So we actually, all of us, are part human and part deva. And some of the challenges that we experience in life are a result of not knowing how to work with the devas that are already with us. So with the body elemental, all the elementals, they're very simple. They need to be fed, they need to be kept happy, and they need to be treated well so that they don't burn out or leave us. If they leave us, that's a very serious issue. Mostly, they just get very damaged and then there's not much we can do with them. But they're also very strong. They can be willful in their own way. If we don't guide them, then they will take control of our lives. So what the physical elemental needs, it's two things. Body-to-body contact with other people, like a hug, for example, and anything that can develop from that. They also need quality sense experience in the form of food, exercise, being out in nature. Your body elemental is happy when it has all of these things. When it doesn't have these things, it starts promoting addictions of various kinds. You can't stop eating food, or you get involved with drugs or alcohol or something like that, or over-exercising, like the people who really damage their bodies from highly intensive exercising. The astral emotional elemental needs quality heart-to-heart connection with other people, and when it doesn't get that, it starts to become like an opera star. It wants all the attention, it's hugely dramatic, it's loud, and we've probably all experienced this. Somebody that we know who's a wonderful person, we dearly love them, but they have a horrible temper. And when we're around them, you can feel the electrical charge building up, and then you just want to get out of the way because all of a sudden, boom, there's the lightning strike. After it's over, they forget it. They're back to being perfectly happy again. And you're terribly traumatized, and they don't understand how that happened. So that's someone whose astral elemental is out of control. So then, what the mental elemental needs is quality mind-to-mind connection. And what that means is sharing time, communal time, with people who share our beliefs and values. Now, all of our elementals are being wonderfully nourished, being together here. And that's one of the reasons why things are peaceful, people are happy, and you'll go away from this out to the outside world, and hopefully you'll be able to sustain it. But you have to take care of your elementals by making sure that they get the things that they need. If the mental elemental doesn't get what it needs, it will do one of two things. It will withdraw from the world into video games, computer games, obsessive searching online, anything having to do with technology, watching stupid television shows, all kinds of things like that. On the other side, if it's involved with people in community, it will become what we call in America a bigot. I don't know how to translate that for those of you who aren't familiar with the word, but you'll understand exactly what I mean. The family is gathered together. Not everyone has the same political ideas. There's someone who absolutely wants to make sure that no political ideas are heard but this person's political ideas. So, banging on the table and pointing the finger and getting louder and louder and not letting anyone else talk. That person is literally possessed by their mental elemental, which has gotten out of control. And then finally, there's the soul or causal elemental. And this one is the most serious one of all, because if it doesn't get soul-to-soul connection with people, it acts out by becoming so depressed that it's impossible to get up in the morning. And when I say that, it can be so extreme that you can't even lift your arm up to get out of bed. What this elemental needs is the knowledge that its presence in the world makes a difference to other people. So any form of service feeds this elemental. Anything we do for the sake of others serves this elemental. So soul-to-soul connection in the sense of seeing people's needs and doing what you can to support them and satisfy their needs. And also hanging out together to do spiritual work, spiritual growth, that also satisfies this deva. Anything that could be called dharma or life purpose. Now, have I told you in very short terms the entire history of humanity and all of its problems? It's the elementals. What we need to do is learn how to master those within ourselves. Then we're at peace, and we become an influence for others to come to peace as well. What happens with the elementals, though, when you go to work, for example, nobody's in a good mood because they don't want to be there. The body's sitting around too long. There's no heart-to-heart connection because if you say anything, somebody will use it against you. Lots of politics and beliefs and values that aren't held in common. No awareness of spirituality. And it's no wonder that people get worn down, because in order to maintain your center in that kind of elemental storm, really, is very difficult. So this idea of working with the elementals, I think, is a key not only to our own inner peace, but also it opens the way for deva communication. So, continuing with the idea of elementals, you'll sometimes see the phrase artificial elementals in any book about thought forms. The word artificial here doesn't mean fake, it means created, shape. So an artificial elemental is a thought form, and as I've talked about several times, especially in conjunction with samskaras, a thought form is its elemental essence coming together, and it's held together and delivered by a somewhat higher deva called a messenger. So the ladder of lives goes from elemental essence up to the nature spirits. These are already on the upward curve. You're already familiar with the beings of the elements that would have to do with earth, water, air, and fire. The kind of messenger I was just talking about would be of this first level of nature spirits. And then there's a kind that I often experience called information-seeking devas. So the tradition in European and American folk tradition is that witches have cats, black cats preferably. And the black cat is called a familiar. And the familiar is always present, but it has a deva. It's not just a cat. And the deva can go anywhere in the world to gather information in order to bring it back to the witch, for her to, or him to do whatever is their desire, which usually is not something good. But information-seeking devas, for me, if I need to find out a piece of information for some research writing that I'm doing, somehow I've called these beings in to help me, and they can search the internet. They can tell me what the necessary search words are so that I can find things that are really obscure. And I don't exactly know how it works, because they tell me the terms are a little indirect. The thing that I'm looking for shows up after 2 or 3 pages, but then if I try to search it directly with the exact words that are on that page, gone, won't appear. So they also will wake me up in the middle of the night and tell me, go look on the online book forum that I buy from, and a rare book that I've been looking for at a reasonable price just came up. I thank them. I never tried to force them to do anything. They just showed up to help me because I needed the help, and it's been great. And when I see them, they look like an animal called a ferret, which is a kind of weasel. And I think the reason is because we have in English a phrase, to ferret out something, and what that means is to figure it out, or to search it out. And so I see them as ferrets. And I see them in my dreams, and they're just, some people have ferrets as pets. These are like deva pets that like to climb on my shoulders and whisper things in my ears. Am I crazy? I mean, I've assumed at the beginning of this that I would just kind of show up, right? I hope I do. I mean, I've been doing this for decades, so.
All good.
And I haven't even told you the weird stories. Okay, so continuing with the climbing the ladder of oneness, there's a group that we could call echo devas. These are the devas that are involved with the group spirits of plants, animals, landscapes, and also what could be called environmentalists. There are devas that are very concerned about all of the trash and waste that we create on the astral plane with our negative thoughts and consumerism and so on. And what they know is that the more of that is created, the more pressure there is for us to live that way. And so they try to clean it up from their side, so we'll clean up our thoughts and feelings on this side, but also so we'll stop being such consumers and creating all of this physical plane waste. So I call those environmentalist devas. And then there's a set that I call link builders. This is what I've mainly talked about during the Sacred Places lectures. The link builders, this is the thing all of us can do. This is the simplest way of working with devas, and in many ways it's also the most visible and productive. And I've mentioned this a few times already in different ways, but if you love your car and you give it a name and you wash it every Sunday, like my dad did, that car will last for years beyond what it normally does. And the reason it lasts for years is the Deva comes in and holds it together. And the reason the Deva does that is because you are being reverential and devotional towards your car. I know it sounds weird, but that's the way it works. When you put out reverence like that, aha, light bulb goes on. When you are putting out these reverential thoughts, whatever you're thinking about, whatever object is receiving these things, it shows up on the astral plane and it becomes what I call an astral birdhouse. It's just waiting for a Deva to come and move in. When the Deva comes in, there's a link that's created between the astral birdhouse and the object on the physical plane, and energy starts to flow back and forth between those. So that's what a connector Deva does. It creates that link. So the next step is, if you're continuing to be reverential, or if you're dealing with a higher level of reverence, for example, in conjunction with something that you consider to be a sacred object, another kind of Deva will start to work through this link, and I call that a purifying Deva. And the purpose of that Deva is to start spreading the sacred space away from the object and out into the room that contains the object. So I'm guessing some of you have been doing this without realizing it, and the sign is, if somebody who doesn't know you very well comes into your living space and says, "Oh, it's so calm and peaceful here," it's because the Devas have come in and are protecting the space, and the purifiers have been busy and have turned it into a kind of sacred space. Again, if you continue working along these lines, at some point what I call a gatekeeper Deva comes in. And the gatekeeper Deva allows more of an energy flow back and forth between the worlds and spreads it a little farther, but is also present to make sure that the connection remains in place. So if you go into a sacred space like a temple or a church that's been used for hundreds and hundreds of years, there will be a guardian Deva there, a gatekeeper, that's involved with making sure that that space is stable and supportive, and as long as we don't just purposefully destroy it or let it fall apart or neglect it, that connection can remain for centuries. So, and we can feel it too. We can feel that we're coming into a holy presence, and it's a Deva that creates that experience. So continuing up the ladder of oneness, we can also make a connection with inspiration Devas. These are ones that support creative work along the lines of arts and crafts and inventions. These would be lower level Devas on the mental plane. And then wisdom Devas, I've worked in my classes with 3 types. I think they're associated with the causal levels. I call them healing wisdom Devas, teaching wisdom Devas, and karma wisdom Devas, karmic wisdom Devas. Each one of them has a specialty that we can learn from. And the Angels of the Four Corners practice is designed to put us in touch with Devas from the causal level, wisdom Devas. Then you can go on to the national Devas. These are the ones that occupy the Buddhic level of being. They're trying to bring the nations all into oneness within them, within the nation itself, but also within the other nations. Obviously, they don't have much of a voice because we're too angry and loud at the mental level for them to hear us and do much with it. But here, the ITC, there's something called the Link Officers Meditation. It's been done since the late 1930s as a way of promoting peace in the world. And there's an individual version of this that you can take home with you. It was offered as a demonstration to the public in my seminar last week. And some papers were printed up with the phrase that you could take with you. So somebody could, I think Arendt is back now, and if you see Arendt around, you can ask him about the Link Officers Meditation and get the copies, or, yes.
I have a copy, so I can make a photo and share it in the WhatsApp group.
Okay, perfect, thank you. And then at the top of the heap we have Deva Rajas. This is another Sanskrit word. Deva is angel, Raja is king. These are the lords of the elements. They're also called the lords of karma. There's starting at the level of the nature spirits, earth, water, air, fire. We have the things that help to create the conditions that we experience on the physical plane. But every plane has a version of that, and at the top are the Deva Rajas of the elements. So again, in stages of cooperative work, we have to learn to develop our intuitive perception. Hopefully we learn to develop all three aspects: energy, consciousness, and information. Then we can watch for contact from the Deva evolution. Here we have to pay attention to the tests that show up. Nature spirits and Devas test us for readiness for cooperative work. Are we going to be scared? Will we see them as aliens? Will we feel like we've been abducted by them and taken, onto a spaceship, which is really just a higher plane, and so on and so forth? Those are all tests. The perception test is the most basic one. I call it, can you see me? So my first ever experience of a Deva happened when I was in college. I was walking in a natural area. It was just between winter and spring. There was almost no one in the park. All of a sudden, a being about this high ran in front of me. And I was really shocked because I could see through it, but I could also see it. And I'd never had that experience before. And the being stopped and looked at me like this, and I was looking at it like that. And it was completely unused to the idea of, being seen. And then it started doing a little dance because it wanted to see whether I really saw it. So it moved over here, and my eyes followed it, and it moved over here, and my eyes followed it. And then it got more and more elaborate, and I lost the contact. So a Deva will show itself to see whether you're ready, and I guess I was, because I wasn't afraid, but it was kind of shocking. And probably that was a kind of nature spirit that's called a gnome, that has to do with earth elements. So another one, I call it the fear test, and that is a test of how close the Deva can come to you before you start to be overwhelmed. There's a wonderful poem by Rainer Maria Rilke, the German poet who many spiritual people know. And in an English translation, it starts like this. Who, if I called out, would hear me among the angelic hierarchies? And even if one did, I would be consumed in that larger existence. Every angel is terrified. Let me see, what's the rest of it? Oh yes, I would be consumed in that larger existence, for beauty is just the beginning of terror, that we're only in it, only that much that we can sustain. Every angel is terrified. So the idea there is, if we're having an experience of beauty, a Deva might be present, but it might be so beautiful that it starts to move into a feeling of terror as our consciousness expands. There's also a joy test. How much joy can you take? That was my experience with the dolphin-like Devas that I mentioned. And there's a form and identity test. Do you recognize me? It's often said that fairies, nature spirits, Devas constantly change form. And one of the reasons that they do that is to see whether you can identify the same Deva each time, no matter what form it takes in your perception. When I work with my students and we're working on at first making contact with the Deva world, almost always these American students who are somewhere between about mid-20s and 60s, the Deva will show up as Tinkerbell from the Disney films, a cute little fairy with a wand and wings from Pinocchio. And they'll say, no, it can't be that. No, it can't be that. But the thing is, in these internal visualizations that we do, when the information shows up in a way that you least expect, that's when you know there's something behind it. So everybody was thinking that angels look differently than Tinkerbell, but it's a start. And then we have to learn or self-remember how to travel and communicate within invisible worlds. That's usually somewhat taxing for us. Most especially, we need to learn the language of feel-think. This is the way that the devas communicate with each other. As I mentioned, it's modifications of the love of the source into expressions about needs and how to satisfy them. It's not conceptual. It's very rich in terms of the amount of information contained. And we have to learn to think completely differently, because we can think conceptually and never have a feeling touch any of the things that we're thinking. We can lie to each other because our desire is to have an influence over people, and therefore the words that we say don't contain the actual emotions that we're feeling. And from the perspective of the devas, it's like our mouth is moving and nothing is coming out. They can't hear that. It takes a lot of learning to figure out how to experience this kind of communication. And one of the best practices is always to be truthful, always to be clear, always to be simple in the way that you express what you're saying to other people. And then you've got some good practice with talking to the devas. I also mentioned that writing poetry is good practice, because we're trying to take a feeling state or a state of consciousness and turn it into words that can help us learn how to translate deva communications. Then there's something called the quest for fairyland. This is something I've been experiencing for the last couple of years. Humans are not really allowed to go in unless they've gone through a kind of training process. They have to be granted clearance before they're allowed to enter. And then once they've been allowed to enter, they have to show that they can get there on their own without help. And I'm struggling with that right now. I've been shown the way. It's an amazing experience. I really want to go back, and I'm in a kind of labyrinth where I keep finding, walls that prevent me from taking the next step. And, as before, keeping records to monitor your progress is also important. A dream journal or occult diary. I would never have known that the experiences I had 35 years ago with dolphins and whales was actually devas until about 15 years ago. I learned what devas were, and then I made the connection. But if I hadn't written those experiences down, I wouldn't have been able to make sense out of feel-think and communicating with devas. So keeping journals is a very good practice. And years of training are required to achieve, cord is a misprint, to achieve core perception and understanding. Core perception is you're coming from your core, nothing can faze you. You're present with a deva, it doesn't overwhelm you, it doesn't make you feel afraid. You're in your dharma. Those are all things, practices that we have to develop to talk to devas and cooperate with them. And then all of the perceptual biases. We have a lot of them with cultural and social and family conditioning. So here, just a very simple one is the example I gave a couple days ago about my friend who was always introducing himself to beings in non-physical reality when wanting to shake their hand and ask what their name was. That's family and social conditioning, and any deva would say, "What are you doing? What are you trying to tell me? That doesn't make any sense." And so any names that we have for devas, it's just a handle that helps us connect to a drawer full of information that we've gathered about a particular being that doesn't really have a name. And then finally, with this set of slides, we should be grateful for all of our encounters with them, and we should know that we'll attract teachers when ready. There is, as I've learned in recent years, what could be called an Institute of Human Deva Relations on the other side. It's this huge, beautiful training ground. Nobody there except the devas, because you don't know how to get there. So one of the reasons I'm trying to talk more about this is the devas are really eager to learn from us and to teach us, and for us to be able to learn from them. And they're waiting, and there's no point of contact from this side. So just remember the Institute of Human-Deva Relations and try to experiment when you're falling asleep at night. Say something about, hey, I'd like to go to school there, and see what shows up in your dreams. At the point when you've got a teacher or teachers, fully conscious cooperative work can begin, and you'll also be able to develop collaborations from both sides because you now know how to communicate with the devas. And then we keep climbing the ladder of oneness. So I'm going to give some examples, and then my talk will be done. So one example of cooperative work with devas is what I already spoke about, co-creation of links. I'll just run through these slides quickly because I've already said it. An object or place becomes perceptible to the deva evolution through conscious or unconscious human actions, feelings, thoughts, and ideals. So we're trying to make the San Francisco statue in the meditation garden perceptible to the devas by putting our hands on it and offering some intention. And the way that we do this is through love, reverence, any kind of intentional use, which could be a habit or a ritual, consecration, which is a ceremony of blessing, and invocation, which is magic. But invocation here should always be an invitation, never a coercing. A nature spirit or deva perceives the object or place as an astral birdhouse and occupies it, thus linking the physical and astral planes. Energy, information, and consciousness begins to flow through the link with effects on the physical plane. Things last longer, time slow down, surroundings are purified, an atmosphere of joy and peace is established. Actions, feelings, thoughts flow more easily. Inspiration, creativity, and magic abound. With these links, flow increases with use. The link is upgraded over time. Higher beings step in to maintain it, establishing connections to higher planes. Its influence expands on the physical plane. And here's an example. So this is a quartz crystal. Sometimes this kind of crystal is called smoky quartz. Most smoky quartz didn't originate that way. It's taken out of the ground clear, and then it's exposed to radiation, and the smokiness comes from radiation. This crystal was naturally smoky. It was found in the ground this way, which makes it very special. I found it, quote unquote, by accident. I was driving in the west with a friend. We were in the mountains. I said, let's take this road. This road took us to a rock shop, and the rock shop had a big basket of stones like this, and they were about $15. In fact, this was 40 years ago. This thing is, as you can see from my holding it in my hands, it's quite massive and heavy. And if you look at the top of it, you will see that all of these spaces are closed off by roughness and by other minerals. So when I started teaching my psychic and spiritual development classes 20 years ago, I had the thought that I would use this stone as a way of kind of purifying the space. So everyone would have a chance to hold it. They could put into it whatever heavy thoughts or negative thoughts they were carrying with them so that they could purify themselves for the work that we were doing. And my idea was that all that stuff would go into the crystal and it wouldn't come out because the upper facets were blocked. So what happened over the course of years was the crystal got upgrades. So suddenly I or one of my students would start noticing that there were some odd effects. In Scottish and Irish lore, there's a kind of nature spirit called a brownie. And supposedly the brownie will come and wash your dishes and sweep your house out at night. Who wouldn't want one of those, right? But I think the real meaning of the brownie is that it purifies the spiritual atmosphere of a place. So a brownie started moving around in my living room, and it was a strange experience because it looked like a coffee pot that had long spider legs. And it moved in the shadows so that it would stretch its leg out very slowly and then move it down into the shadow of something else. And it very slowly would circle the room like that. And I could see it, and several of my students could sense it without being able to see it. And, the room ended up having this more uplifting experience. Then a gatekeeper came, and eventually what I call an astral environmentalist deva, who was something like, if you can imagine a deva wearing a hazardous materials suit, that was sort of what they looked like. They were dealing with the emotional garbage that we had put into the stone, taking it away, clearing it so that it wouldn't infect or affect other people. This is called a Morayan crystal, but if you look for it in crystal shops throughout the world, you won't find it. And of course, the store that I bought it from no longer exists, unfortunately. So, this is a Hopi Kachina. The Hopi are a southwestern indigenous tribe in the United States. This was actually made by the Navajo tribe, which is a different tribal entity. This was made for tourists. It's a cow, supposedly. When I was visiting this area, I found this in an antique store, and it made me laugh. And so I bought it, and I put it in my living room, and somehow Deva beings will look through those eyes into my living room, especially when I'm having a conversation where either I or the other person or both of us should be laughing at ourselves. And I'll suddenly feel that the Deva is present, and I'll look, and it almost seems like the eyes are glowing. And then I'll tell whoever's with me, oh, I have a name for it, Cowie. So I'd say, oh, Cowie's looking at us, and then we have to laugh, and then any tensions that were building up start to disappear. From this, it should be obvious that most children have Devas in their dolls and their stuffed animal toys as a result of loving them. So I'm going to talk about how to work with inspiration Devas. I'm going to go quickly. The goal of this is I'd like to share with you a piece of music that I composed. It's just 2 minutes long. That was inspired by Devas, because I've been learning how to take dictation from the Devas when I'm composing. And for those of you who want to make the experiment of doing something like that, these slides will be helpful. So from the human side, you can set your intentions. For example, this piece is a woodwind quintet. That means a piece it's a piece of classical music for flute, oboe, clarinet, French horn, and bassoon. And the content was decided because I wanted to write a set of variations on a piece that was by another composer. And the medium was the woodwind quintet. The form was going to be variations. You can decide on all things like that. And then you go into a state of consciousness where you're engaged in improvisatory play that helps you move from mental body concepts about what the piece should be in order to experience a causal body flow. And that's where the Deva contact and inspiration can come in. You follow an inspiration wherever it takes you. You stop when the next step isn't clear, because if you force things, you're back in the mental body and you're just using your will. You start letting yourself be guided, which can be inwardly by dreams, visions, and physical teachers or energetic shapes, non-physical teachers as well. It's hard to describe what I mean by energetic shapes, but if you ever write a poem, you can feel that within you is something that wants to be expressed, and that's a shape. And you can experience music that way too, but the shapes are usually a little more complex and almost architectural. So when I'm composing, I try to attune myself to the shape and then find a way to recreate that shape and sound. You can also do it outwardly by noticing the ways in which your intention to create the piece helps direct you to any kind of guidance that you need. Books, pieces of music that inspire you, having the inspiration of going back to listen to a piece that you haven't listened to for years that might help move things when you're stuck. That's the kind of thing you can experience at that level. The whole focus is to move from ego-directed, goal-oriented, preference-based, quote-unquote, development because that tends to be mental body enforcing things, and most contemporary classical music is a direct expression of all of that. To Deva-directed, flow-oriented, truth-based unfoldment, kind of a blooming. And then you learn to be amazed at the unexpected ways in which your intentions are realized. I had a piece that I was writing for choir, and this one part wanted to be written in a key that was going to be very difficult for a choir to sing. So I changed it to another key that would be easier. But it was in the middle of the piece. I didn't know what would come before. I didn't know what would come after. When those pieces started to come together, it only worked in the original key. So that's what I mean by be amazed at some of the unexpected ways in which things like this can show up. Because at this point, you're experiencing an interweaving of human and Deva consciousness. This, of course, is the basis of the text that I had you read about Devas. That's a very, I would say that's a very advanced text, but if you reread it after considering these slides with an idea towards how could you, in whatever creative medium that you're working in, realize these ideals, then the idea of how human and Deva consciousness can be interwoven with each other won't be quite so either scary or completely not understandable. However, there is a danger working with Devas, the danger of addiction to the timeless joy of Deva-assisted creation. There are lots of stories of geniuses who are, they're acting under inspiration. Beethoven, for example, they forget to eat for several days, they don't really sleep very much. Often this is because the Deva is present, the Deva doesn't have a body, it doesn't understand time and space. The human is overlighted by the Deva, the human likes that experience, it doesn't want to let go of that experience, it just wants to keep it going. But the result is a breakdown of the body if you don't pay attention to your needs. So if you're working with the Deva and you feel that you're having trouble connecting or disconnecting, it's important to say, first, thank you very much, offer deep heartfelt gratitude, say goodbye, and then know that when you request their presence the next time, they'll show up. But otherwise, you'll be awake all night. And we have to make sure we don't neglect self-care, as I mentioned, eating, sleeping, exercising, or interacting with other humans. Obviously, if we had a partner who was constantly allowing us constantly to experience joy, we would never want to be without them. When we hit a Deva, it's sort of like, oh, so much for physical partners. But that's not helpful or healthy. So here, offer deep heartfelt gratitude at every stage for the existence and guidance of these higher powers. Some people know that the great composers, for example, Franz Joseph Haydn, at the end of every score that he wrote the words, praise God. And that was his way of offering to what his version of the Devas was, deep heartfelt gratitude for the opportunity of being inspired. So this brings me to the piece that I want to play for you. The piece is 15 minutes long. This is a 2-minute long excerpt. It's the excerpt that I think best expresses a Deva experience of consciousness. The piece was written in honor of my father, who, as I told you, had passed away. And not all of the piece is at this level of peace, inner peace. Some of it's really struggling, as you might expect, working on feelings connected with somebody who had passed on. So I'll play it twice, because the first time it's hard to settle into the experience. These are not live instruments, they're MIDI instruments. I think the effect would be increased with live instruments, but I haven't had the opportunity to get it performed yet. It did seem to change the energy in the room a bit. From my perspective, the emotion that's projected there is a kind of compassion that understands human suffering, and that for me feels like a kind of gift of peace over my father's passing. So there's only one slide left, and that is a picture of a music diva by another artist named H.K. Challoner, also Janet Melody, Elsa Mills, from a book called Watchers of the Seven Spheres. You can certainly see the element of cosmic joy that's expressed in that. She was also a Theosophist. So, any questions before we break for lunch? This is a big subject. Probably the best way to talk about it is that there are basically two classifications, I guess, categories. One of them is the devas are out of alignment. That means that the human and the deva are not really together. And in that case, the deva creates spinning, what I call spinning. Spinning mind, spinning emotions, spinning feelings in the body, anxiety, all kinds of emotions like that. If you bring someone like that into a space where there are people who don't know about the elementals, it won't be long before everyone else's elementals are spinning. In the same way that with a piano, you can hold a note down without playing it, and then if someone plays that note on another instrument, the piano note will sound. That's called sympathetic vibration. In the same way, if someone has their elementals aligned and they go into a space, then people will have a tendency to be calmed down. But there are also people, I call this experience arm wrestling with people's elementals. You know that you put it on the table and that kind of thing. If somebody is really in their mental body and the mental elemental is coming out and you're trying to explain something to them and they always have an argument because you can't possibly be right, they'll say no to anything that you say, even if it's really helpful and sensible as far as you're concerned. Behind the scene of the argument is the mental deva of this person, the body elemental of this person, trying to get your own body elemental to collapse. So that's fun for them. They have this independent existence. And at another level, it's fun for the devas to get someone worked up at the astral emotional level for there to be that kind of electrical discharge that I was talking about. So those are some other ways. The elementals don't really leave you, so they're not like wandering around looking to connect with other elementals. Yeah, they like to play with each other, and hopefully they're playing in a way that supports you and the other person and whatever relationship that you have. But, this is maybe a somewhat off-color example, but let's say that a couple is making love, and all of a sudden it moves in a direction that becomes hurtful or harmful to one or the other. Devas love intensity, and so what happens in that case is the mind has let go of the honoring of the other person's body and feelings, and the deva is simply going after the intensity of the experience. Also, think of a 4-year-old boy. It's 2 or 3 hours past his bedtime. He's with a group of adults at a party. He's tearing around every single direction he possibly can. If you look at his eyes, they're like this. And it almost looks like he's possessed. And in fact, his soul went to bed. And his elemental is acting out by doing all of this running around. And you can see it. So, as I mentioned, it's a large subject. I hope that gave you some ideas.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay. So first, they have to operate according to physical laws, which means that if there's an accumulation of too much heat in one area, it needs to be dispersed somehow, and hurricanes are one way to do that. Second, they also need to let us know that we've taken climate change and accelerated it so that what took thousands of years before is now happening in less than 10 years, let's say. So they have to let us know that we're having an effect that isn't good for us and it isn't good for the planet. And so the combination of needing to do more and more of this redistribution of water and heat and so on, with our needing to learn how not to create the conditions that causes that, this is what creates the incredibly intense, damaging storms. So it's a warning to people who are ready to be warned. If some people who don't believe in devas think that's the will of God, and they have to ask themselves, why is it? And they may come up with unintelligent, unrelated answers, or they might realize that we have to change our lives around cars and fossil fuels and things like this. So there are different evolutionary levels, but one thing I think is not an accident in America is the hurricanes that affect the oil fields in the Caribbean Ocean. This happens all the time, over and over, and I think the devas are steering the storms in that direction. They're trying to get attention, really, and to encourage us to make change. There's a book by Dora Van Gelder that's in the bookstore called The Real World of Fairies, and at the end she describes what it's like to experience a hurricane as a clairvoyant in relation to the devas. Pretty interesting. So was there more? The question can be answered with pretty much the same set of instructions. You create what's called a grounding cord. A grounding cord connects your energy field or the energy field of a place down to the physical, the energetic core of the planet. It allows any negative energy to be flushed away. In the center of the planet, it will be broken down and recycled. So we protect ourselves by emptying out, by so-called purifying ourselves. We can do that with a grounding cord. But we can also create a grounding cord for a space. So Justin and I were talking about something that happened at the national headquarters of the Theosophical Society in America. I was visiting there, and this was just a few weeks ago, and a long-time resident died there by suicide. And so the energy was really stirred up. And I sat with one of my students who come with me in the meditation room, and we created a grounding cord that was large enough, as large as the meditation room, as a way of just kind of sucking out all of the heaviness and negative energy from this very depressed person and from the reactions of the people on the campus and so on. And I was told by Justin when he arrived that he'd heard that I'd done something and it seemed to have had some kind of effect. So we can do that.
Night and day, like literally, complete difference.
So it's a technique that works, and if you have trouble creating a grounding cord or moving it down to the core of the planet, the fact that you want to do it, you can request a deva. The deva will come and help you. Or if you imagine the deva in the form of energy hands that can help you visualize the experience and communicate to the deva, you can imagine the energy hands are taking the energy field of the room or your personal energy field and drawing the cord down, and that either gives them the instruction to do it, or the deva comes inside the energy hands and does it. And then, fill the space with blessings, with good intentions, and ask a deva to hold that space, and then come back from time to time to make sure that the protection is working. So, yeah, another question. Well, it's going to sound like a cop-out, so to speak, but devas work for gratitude, the joy and the gratitude that we feel working with them, and our deep, heartfelt gratitude, it feeds them. It's an offering. Their work with us is an offering from the source, but it's given regardless of our attitude towards it. But our corresponding gratitude for it lifts us up closer to Source, and then they've done their job and we're doing our job of learning and growth. That's considered an equal exchange. If you feel like you need to make some other kind of offering, any object that you bless can serve that purpose. The longer you hold on to it, the more intentions you put into it, good intentions, the stronger it is. It shows up on the astral plane, a link is created, you place it as an expression of gratitude, and then it's there to kind of draw in gratitude and keep generating it. There are lots of ways that you can think about doing that. I mean, we can't pay them in money, right? And all the fairy stories say that the fairies want our firstborn child. You know, so what about those of us who will never have a firstborn child? I mean, they never asked that from me. So they really, you know, if their influence brings joy into the world, that gives them great satisfaction. And as far as, you know, they're emanations of the thoughts of God, it's like, what else would they need from us? They only need that we know that they're there and that they're being helpful, and we're grateful for that, and we're willing to work with them. So a group that is in sync with each other creates a thought form. The thought form becomes visible on a higher plane. A deva can come in and hold that thought form. And in holding the thought form, the group has more cohesiveness. The idea of what kind of person is suitable for the group also starts to show up in an energetic way, so that somebody who's not in vibrational rapport with it won't like it. They will feel somehow pressured to move out, even though there's no direct desire to make them go. They don't like to be there. If the group sustains itself over time, this thought form develops over time. Usually it develops two poles. The positive pole is full of all of the ideals, and the negative pole is more like an elemental. It just wants to eat. And it depends, you know, with a group, what that means is more members, more money, more people reading the books, you know, that kind of thing. Whenever I go around to any place where the Theosophical Society is present, I'm aware of both of these poles. And of course the workers are all consciously aligned with the higher ideals, but they often have this elemental on their backs saying, do more, do more, do more, do more. And it's a problem because the devas don't have time, space, or bodies, and so you can actually wear yourself out if you've got that kind of elemental experience. So that's another large subject, but what you're asking about is definitely real. Definitely.